for the fantasy football season, and his quarterback sits every matchup this week. The first one, Detroit Lions at the Packers, Thursday Night Football. So division rival, division matchup, obviously. And both these offenses so far have been operating well in the early going of the season. So Jared Goff, I got as a start this week. He's got great weapons. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Craig Reynolds, and Sam Laporta has been well for this Lion team. So this week here, even versus a pretty solid Packer defense, I think Goff and this Lion team can have a good ball game, and this is a potential shootout. Now to Jordan Love, he's a start for me once again, and so far 20 or more fantasy points in the first 3 outings of the season. So this Packer team, they obviously were confident that Love could step right in and take Rodgers' spot here, and obviously they traded him away to the New York Jets. So right now it's looking good for the Packers. Jordan Love, even with a lot of youngsters and Christian Watson out of the lineup, is putting up these big numbers with multiple touchdowns per game and going out there and making plays. So he's a start in a potential shootout this week. The next game, Atlanta Falcons at the Jacksonville Jaguars in London, 9:30 on Sunday. So right here, the Atlanta Falcons, they just can't move the ball on offense. Desmond Ridder, to be honest, shouldn't be the quarterback, in my opinion. Taylor Heineke at least could come in there and move the ball down the field. I know he's a gunslinger, but right here, Desmond Ridder's not moving the football, and it's taking a bad impact on guys like Kyle Pitts and Drake London. And this week here, he's a sit. Trevor Lawrence, the last few weeks here, he hasn't shown much, even though it's a good matchup on paper. To me, he's a borderline option. He most likely will crack my top 15 in the quarterback rankings here later on this week is Trevor Lawrence. But this week here, after what I've seen over the last 2 weeks in matchups where I thought he would have great opportunities, Trevor Lawrence really hasn't come through for fantasy owners. So right now, he's a borderline option, even with great weapons like Calvin Ridley, Evan Ingram, and Christian Kirk, and Travis Etienne. Now to the Ravens at the Cleveland Browns. Lamar Jackson, you're going to start him each and every week. I know he didn't look great passing the football in that tough loss versus the Indianapolis Colts, but running the football over 100 yards, found the end zone rushing twice, and with that ability, with his running ability and the knack for finding the end zone as well, running the football. Now to the Browns, Deshaun Watson, I'm going to give him the nod in this one. This Brown team's going to be more of a pass-happy type of club, obviously, now with Nick Chubb out, and they're going by running backs with Jerome Ford, Kareem Hunt over there, and even Elijah Moore we saw in that ball game get some run in the backfield. But anyway, Deshaun Watson, he's looked decent in the first 2 out of 3 games this season. And this is a ball game where I think he's going to have to make some plays in this one and throw the football all around the yard. And you know, Deshaun Watson, he's probably been circling this ball game on his calendar to see if he can outplay Lamar Jackson in this ball game. So with this being a good division matchup between these 2 teams here, I got Watson as a start now. Next matchup's Minnesota Vikings at the Carolina Panthers. So Kirk Cousins, he's a start each and every week. So far, he's amongst the league leaders in yards this season, and he's got great weapons. Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, obviously, and Justin Jefferson, the best receiver in the league. So once again, Cousins each and every week. Not much to say. He's a start. Bryce Young, Andy Dalton, depending who sits in this game. It's just tough to trust one of these guys, because I know Andy Dalton last week, he had a good fantasy day, but it's tough to throw him out there and trust him in your basic 12, even 14 team formats. In 2 quarterback leagues, if he does start, he's a guy who would possibly play as Andy Dalton. But if you don't, obviously Bryce Young, I'm not going to start as well. We pretty much haven't seen much out of the rookie Bryce Young in the early going of his NFL career. So he's a sit for me this week. Now Cincinnati Bengals at the Tennessee Titans. Joe Burrow, somehow he got through that ball game and played pretty well, I believe. Here was Joe Burrow in that one for this Bengal team on Monday Night Football in the victory versus the Los Angeles Rams. So this week versus the Tennessee Titan team, that's been one of the worst teams in the league over the last few seasons versus the pass and versus wide receivers. Joe Burrow, you put him in your starting lineup. Ryan Tannehill, he's a sit for me. We just haven't seen much out of Ryan Tannehill over the last few seasons, and his offensive line, one of the worst in the league. And he's been a turnover machine here, is Ryan Tannehill right now. So while he hasn't done much, and he's not getting the ball to his playmakers like DeAndre Hopkins, Traylon Burks, and holding on to the football too long and taking the big hits, he's a sit for me. And we saw the Cincinnati Bengal defense really get to Matthew Stafford in that Week 3 ball game. Next game is the Los Angeles Rams at the Indianapolis Colts. So right now, Matthew Stafford, he's been putting up decent numbers this season. He's Stafford for this Los Angeles Ram team. And this week, I think he could go out there and put in a decent ball game, but I have him as a borderline option because he threw a few interceptions in that game versus Cincinnati Bengals, is Matthew Stafford, and he's not a guy that week in and week out consistently could put up points. I know he's getting yards this season, but touchdowns really haven't been there. So right now, versus middle of the pack type Indianapolis defense that pretty much shut down Lamar Jackson in terms of throwing the football, he's borderlining out to the Colts either if it's going to be Anthony Richardson or Gardner Minshew. I have no interest in starting any of these players in this ball game. So right now, Richardson, we know, is in concussion protocol, possibly might return. And Gardner Minshew, he had a decent ball game and a surprising victory at the Ravens. The Colts won that one. But anyway, this week here, I can't trust any of these guys, and they're both sits for me into this game. Now the next ball game, Tampa Bay Bucks at the New Orleans Saints. Baker Mayfield, he didn't look all that great versus one of the better defenses in the league versus the Philadelphia Eagles in the Week 3 game. And Baker Mayfield, no doubt about it, he's improved from last season to this season, and him and Mike Evans have a great rapport and good chemistry. But this week, I just can't trust Baker Mayfield to go out there and put up fantasy points or be a factor, even in the middle of the pack matchup at the Saints. Now to the Saints, Derek Carr, we know he's banged up with the shoulder injury. He's week to week right now, and if there's a chance he plays in this game, obviously, which I don't think he will, but I'm putting him on the list anyway here. He's a sit for me as Derek Carr. I don't think he could go out there, really do much and make the plays. And this Buck defense isn't all that bad. I know Jalen Hurts didn't have that great of a game, even though they shredded him on the ground with this Eagle team. But I think in this one, even Jameis Winston versus former team, he's not a guy you could trust. Obviously available in over 90% of fantasy leagues here is Winston. I know they got some good weapons. Chris Olave having a good year. Michael Thomas staying healthy so far. Rashid Shaheed. And Alvin Kamara should be back in this ball game getting a decent amount of work. But anyway, it's tough to trust any of these quarterbacks, and they're all sits in this one. Now to the Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. So Tua, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy football this season here. When you got a guy like Tyreek Hill, it just opens up the whole field to spread the football out. And hopefully Jalen Waddle could come back in this ball game as well for the Dolphins in a big division clash here with these two teams from the AFC East. So Tua, he's matchup proof. I know some people benched him last week because they thought Denver was going to make some noise and shut them down. But obviously that's not the case. And he's a guy who's matchup proof, like I said, is Tua. So he's a start. Josh Allen matchup proof as well. I know this Dolphin defense isn't all that great, and Jalen Ramsey's out at least 1 or 2 more ball games. And Josh Allen, after that bad week 1, the last 2 weeks he's put his head down, he's gone out there, and he's put in some good fantasy ball games. So he's a start, and you drafted him as a top 3 quarterback for a reason. Now to the Broncos at the Chicago Bears. This could be the worst game of the week here with the 2 worst teams possibly in the league. But Russell Wilson, so far, he's been putting up at least 18 or more fantasy points in the first 3 weeks of the season here. Now they go to Soldier Field at the Chicago Bears. So Russell Wilson, him and Cortland Sutton are building a rapport. He's working pretty well in the Sean Payton offense. But the thing is here, it's just the defense, I think, for this Bronco team. They lost week 1, a close ball game. Week 2, they didn't do much. And then week 3, they got the doors blown off, losing 70-20. But anyway, I think Russell Wilson, like I said, he's building a rapport with Cortland Sutton. Marvin Mims, he's been a nice deep ball threat and an athletic rookie to stretch the field. And Jerry Jeudy coming off a 5-catch, 81-yard game. So right now, Russ, I think could have a good ball game at Chicago where their defense can't stop anyone. First 3 weeks of the season, and he's starting. Justin Fields, one more time, I'm going to give him the starting tag since it's this Denver Bronco defense here where we just saw them get torched, like I said, for 70 points. So Justin Fields, he's been in his head all season. Last season, he just went out there and he played his game. But right now, he's saying it's a lot of the coaching that's getting in his head, and he's being robotic out there as Justin Fields. So this week, last chance for Fields. And I know Fields, he was taken as a top 4, top 5 quarterback in some fantasy leagues here, but right now he's not getting anything going. The only guy really doing anything on this offense has been DJ Moore. So Justin Fields, if you want to shy away from him this week, I could see that as well. But if you want to go out there and put him in your starting lineup, I could see it versus a Denver team, like I said, that just gave up 70 points to the Miami Dolphins. Now to the Commanders at the Eagles, pretty much straightforward. Sam Howell's been a turnover machine in the early going. I know week 2 we had a big fantasy day, over 25 fantasy points, but this week here versus a vicious defensive line and one of the best defenses in the league going on the road at Philadelphia. No way I'm trusting Howell. He's a sit. And Jalen Hurts, who drafted him as a top 3 quarterback for a reason. So far, not monster numbers with that one patent, 35, 40 point fantasy day for Hurts, but he's going out there putting up consistent numbers. Him and A.J. Brown back on the same page. after Brown popped off for a big ball game, 20 yards. And he's a start now to the Steelers. At the Houston Texans, Kenny Pickett, he's just not consistent enough to trust in fantasy leagues here. Maybe a 2-quarterback league or bye-week filler down the line here. But this week, even versus a mediocre to poor defense in the Houston Texans, Kenny Pickett's not a guy I'm going to start this week. Now to CJ Stroud. Stroud, he's looked good as a rookie. A lot of poise in the pocket. He's hitting his receivers. He's got good timing going with Tank Dell, the other rookie, obviously, on this offense. And so far, he's had 2 ball games here with 20 or more fantasy points is CJ Stroud. I know this week it's a tough matchup with one of the better defenses coming to town here in the Pittsburgh Steelers. But like I said, Stroud interception so far this season. I know he has 2 fumble losses, but as long as he gets protection, he's making smart decisions and moving the ball down the field with talented wide receivers like Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Robert Woods. So I would give this kid the nod, and I think he cracks the top 15 this week. Now to the Raiders at the Los Angeles Chargers, a division matchup. The Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo's in concussion protocol right now, but I think Jimmy still might give it a go. And if you don't, obviously Brian Hoyer then is the quarterback, and they're both sits anyway, in my opinion. Garoppolo, I know he put up a lot of yards in last week's game, but a lot of come from behind catch-up ball this Raider team was playing versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. But Jimmy G, like I said, he's never been really a fantasy option. Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, definitely solid 2 wide receivers on this team. But even in a matchup versus a poor Charger defense, I can't trust him or Brian Hoyer. Obviously this week, now Justin Herbert, he's a start for me. I know Mike Williams out for the season, unfortunately torn ACL, but it's next man up over there for this Charger team. And they got talented wide receivers. You got Joshua Palmer, who's been the pickup of the week. Got Quentin Johnson, first-round pick, who I could see start breaking out now, getting more snaps and playing time in 3 receiver sets here. And this Los Angeles Charger team, they're an offense that just wants to keep pushing that ball down the field with offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. And we're seeing it so far this season. Keenan Allen already with 2 monster ball games, and he's amongst the league leaders in fantasy points. So this week here versus a pretty weak secondary, I think Herbert goes in for another big ball game and is a top 5 quarterback this week. Next game's Cardinals at the San Francisco 49ers. Pretty much straightforward. Joshua Dobbs got his first career victory last week versus the Dallas Cowboys in a surprising win. And Dobbs, he's been pretty solid weeks 2 and week 3. But this week here versus possibly the best team in the league in the San Francisco 49ers in a division matchup over there in the NFC West, I don't see Dobbs doing much. And how could you really trust him? Like I said, they don't got a lot of weapons as well, is this Arizona Cardinal team. I know Hollywood Browns were pretty decent in the early going. Zach Ertz has had 2 solid games. But right now, versus a tough defense and a team that really could get to the quarterback and make plays, he's a sit. Brock Purdy, 8-0 in his career. One of the best quarterbacks in the league already in terms of taking a team and just taking them to the next level. I know Jimmy Garoppolo was solid. Trey Lance got hurt, but they obviously believe here in Brock Purdy is this 49er team, and he's putting up numbers, and it just seems like 200 yards and 2 touchdowns week in and week out. You could pencil him in this week here versus a weak defense. I got him as a start. Now to the New England Patriots at the Cowboys. Mac Jones, he's a sit for me. This Cowboy defense, I know they got shredded in last week's ball game, but it was more of the run than the pass here from the Arizona Cardinals. So this week, Mac Jones, he could be running a lot in this one. This offensive line not that good over there for this Patriot team. And this Cowboy team, after coming off a bad loss versus one of the worst teams in the league, you know they're going to want to go out there and get pressure on the quarterback and put in a good defensive performance. So this week, while Mac Jones really don't have great receivers or playmakers on the outside, I think this Cowboy team could shut them down for the most part in terms of fantasy points. And he's a sit. Dak Prescott is sit for me as well. Dak Prescott, he just can't punch the ball into the end zone now. The last 2 ball games, 3 for 10 in the red zone, and the Cowboys been settling for a lot of field goals. So Dak Prescott, week 1, he didn't do much, only 7 fantasy points. Week 2, he had 23 fantasy points versus a good Jet defense. And then last week versus Arizona, he could have easily had 30 fantasy points. But like I said, they can't punch the ball in the red zone. And when they have, it's pretty much been Tony Pollard doing the damage over there. So Dak Prescott, he's a quarterback coming into the year I wasn't a fan of for fantasy football. And right now, he's not doing anything really. So he's a sit versus a pretty solid D. Now Sunday Night Football, Kansas City Chiefs at the New York Jets. Patrick Mahomes banged up with the ankle injury, but it still doesn't matter. He came in that second half of the game and still played good football. And he's a start and obviously the number 1 quarterback taken in most leagues this year in the draft. Zach Wilson, one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. I don't know how anyone could trust him, and I don't know why this Jet team's still going out there putting him in the ball games here. He just doesn't have it. We've seen 2 seasons of Zach Wilson. He's just one of those quarterbacks that obviously he don't get it. I know he's got a good arm and athleticism, but that can only take you so far. And it worked in college football, but it hasn't worked in the pros. And this week here versus Kansas City Chiefs defense, that's definitely improved from last year to this year. He's a definite sit in the last game of the week. Seahawks at the New York Giants. And right here, Geno Smith, he's been pretty solid 2 out of 3 weeks to start the year here. And we know this Giant defense has a lot of rookies and inexperienced guys. So right now, this defense has been shredded so far in the early going. Week 1, 40 points given up to the Dallas Cowboys. I know it wasn't all offense, though. Week 2 versus the Cardinals, they gave up 28 points to that offense. And then week 3, the San Francisco 49ers dominated in each aspect of that ball game. So right here, I think Geno Smith could put in a decent ball game. I'm not definitely penciling him as a starter because Geno on the road is a different quarterback than he is at home. But this week here, if you put Geno in your starting lineup, I don't think it's a bad move, because when you got guys like DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Kenneth Walker, and Smith Najaba, that's a pretty solid offense. And I think Geno could go out there and make plays. And now Daniel Jones, he's a borderline option for me. The wide receiver position has definitely been a big problem for this Giant team over the last few seasons. And their offensive line's one of the worst lines in the league as well, where Jones is not getting time. He's been running for his life a lot. Right now is Daniel Jones for this Giant team. And the Seattle defense, they could go out there and make some plays. I know Andy Dalton, he went out there and went over 300 yards, but a lot of garbage time. And I believe this could be a close game. So right now, both these quarterbacks are borderline to me. So that's quarterback start sits every matchup here for week 4 of the fantasy football season.